Peter, tell us about your earliest memories of Sir Stanley Matthews.
Well, they would be very young. It would be after the war. So I'd be, some sort of 8, something like that, 8 or 9, at that sort of age. But I used to be taken occasionally to Stoke City with my brothers. I'm from a large family, and I had a gap between the next brother, because I had quite a lot of sisters, and my elder brothers used to take me to Stoke. I always remember it was Townend, which was a bank, a tip, and they'd find a good place so that I could see the game, and that would be my the very early memories of that Stoke City team after the war, when the great man played.
Can you remember the anguish when he left for Blackpool? Did you get a feel of that at that age?
Well, I'd be pretty young, but I know there was a lot of concern about it, and because we talked a lot of football at home, as they did in places like Golden Hill. Football, even then, was a big topic of conversation, and there were people weren't happy that he was leaving.
And at Blackpool, he enjoyed great success, and I guess the pinnacle was the '53 final, the Matthews final. Did you catch any of that on television?
I actually saw it on television. We hadn't got a television, but we went to a relative's named Doyle's in Golden Hill, and the back streets I can remember. I could take you to the house now if it's still there. I'm not sure. I think some of them still survive, but it's changed such a lot. And it was a pretty crowded living room when we all saw what a dramatic final it was. It's gone down as one of the great post-war finals.
Did people still around here still feel a pride in what he was achieving at Blackpool? He was still considered a son of the Potteries.
Well, he was. We know he's our most famous football son, and there's always been great interest in him, and because there have been very few names, if any, more iconic than Stanley Matthews in terms of English football. He's up there with just a few.
And of course, eventually he does come back to Stoke City in the early '60s. Tell us about the joy and the impact that had on the area.
Well, that had an amazing impact, because the crowd went up. You probably can find the figures. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but they were dramatic. The change that had taken place and the feel-good factor around the city that he was coming back, and so yes, it was. It created a huge anticipation and a really good feeling.
What was it like to watch? I know he was getting on a bit. What was it like to watch him live?
Well, he was an amazing player, and he would have been an amazing player today. I take the view that you can only be the best in your own time, and I've had that view a very long time. But I'm equally certain that, remember, he was a very fine athlete. He was a man before his time. He was into diet, and he didn't drink. He was into all sorts of stretching and things that are now commonplace. So he was a very intelligent guy who wanted to look after himself and wanted to play for a long time. He achieved that, but he was clearly a man who thought a lot about the game and a lot about fitness and the best way to extend his career.
It seems unthinkable now that a man of 50 was still playing professional football. Was it mind-boggling even then?
Well, it is a record, and I can tell you a little story which he told me, and he told me with a straight face, but I was never quite sure, but I think he was very serious when he told me. He said that I was chatting with him in the boardroom, because he was the president of the club, and I used to see him a bit, and I'd taken him out for dinner, and so I got to know him very well, and we became good friends. And he did say, and he said, one of the mistakes I made, I retired too early. I'd got 2 more years in me. Whether Tony Waddington agreed with that, I shall never know, because I never asked him. But it was they were very much from his lips, and I remember smiling when he told me the story.
Retired too early at 50.
He said, yes.
What were his gifts as a player? Summing him up, what were his great gifts as a footballer?
Well, he had wonderful. He had pace. You know, he was as a boy. He was his record for the 100 yards was very impressive. He was a fine athlete and a fine sprinter, and so he got pace. But he got this surge of pace, this quick 10 yards when he could just go. He just left you, and sometimes they were on the back because he dazzled them with his bit of skill. But he got wonderful balance. You look at good players, he got that wonderful balance. And you'll see old shots of him, and you can see that just looking at old pictures. And you've seen him in certain poses and postures where you see that great balance he had, and wonderful dribbling skills. Dribbling was much more common then, and he wasn't called the Wizard of the Dribble for nothing. He got a wonderful striker of the ball. His corners are much talked about. I don't believe the stories about the lace being the right put in the right position for Freddie Steele to head the ball, but it's a good story.
How would he have got on in today's game? Lighter boots, lighter footballs, better pitches. How would he have fared in today's game?
Well, I have a view. You can only be the best in your own time, as I've said, and Stanley was that. And I think he would have adjusted. It probably would have suited him absolutely perfectly because he got all the skills, got wonderful touch, got everything you need to be a modern day footballer. So yes, he would have been very much at home. These wonderful pitches, a lighter ball, wasn't the greatest header of a ball, so he might have headed the modern ball.
A great footballer, as we've said, but also you got to know him in his later years, being on the board. What about as a person? How would you sum him up?
Well, he was very modest. He was a very modest man, given that his position in football, as certainly no one's had a more prominent position in football than Stanley did in his day. You've got to remember, things were different. But he was what I call the first truly international player, i.e. what I'm saying, he was the first footballer to be recognised all over the world, I think. I don't know who predates him. I don't think anybody does, and that's quite something. And the attendance would go up simply because Stanley Matthews was playing. No telly, remember? You didn't see him on the television, so they got to go and see him in the flesh. And in London, crowds would go up. Europe, South America, got to go and see this special player. So it gives you some idea of just how significant he was in the game.
A global star. Obviously.
A global. I think he was I call it the first truly international player. What I mean is what you've just said, the first global name in football. Mm.
And finally, Peter, what do you think his legacy is to the football club, to football, and to the city of Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, he is, without question, our most famous footballing son, and it'll take some changing. It'd be nice to think somebody could come and perhaps measure against such an icon. But there's no doubt he stands there as our most famous ever footballer, and it's a great legacy. And it's also even now I've been away and been in football tournaments with, say, England, and where are you from? Stoke City. Even in modern times, people will say, Stanley Matthews. That tells you something, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Mm. And a privilege, I'm guessing, to have known him.
Oh, it was, and I got on very well with him. I liked his company. He'd got a charming wife, and I used to enjoy sometimes having dinner with them. He was a very careful eater and a very modest eater. He was a bit like, I always used to say he was a bit like Peter Pan. He never wanted to grow old. None of us do, but Stanley in particular kept that youthful movement. I used to think even in his old age, you almost think he might have gone out and played.
Fantastic.
Is that okay?
And of course he used to dress with his baseball cap in his jeans, and he was just so common in the right way.
He didn't want to grow old. I'm sure, by Peter Pan, I used to say to people, Stan doesn't want to, and so he'd do things like that, I think, to make him, to feel young, to feel young. And he did move, in his old age. He died at 85, didn't he? But prior to that, he kept really very well.
He never had any weight problems.
Never had any weight. He was very, very careful what he did. He did eat like a mouse, and he didn't have a drink. So he looked after himself, and you almost felt he would go on, and but he seemed to. I think his wife dying seemed to affect him.
Yes, because she died about a year earlier.
Very close, but not long before, and I just had a feeling he went a bit downhill after that. She clearly was good for him, and she was a very smart, attractive woman who very well educated. Czechoslovakia, an officer class. You know, her dad was an army officer, and so you could tell she came from. She came from a well-educated family, but she was a nice person.
But that definitely affected him.
And I was surprised that suddenly it happened because I think he was affected by his wife dying. But
and a reluctant hero, wasn't he?
Oh yes, he didn't. You know, he was a very modest man. He was a very. He didn't. You know, obviously he didn't look for people to come and run about after him or anything like that. He was quite shy in his own way. And I think I tell you what I think he was very wary of people. He felt he'd been used a bit.
Yeah. I'm sure he had.
And he probably had. I mean, that's life. That these things happen, and I think it made him a little bit reserved in a way. And he used to be, once he got to know you, you were fine. But I think he was always cautious about were people trying to get something out of him. You know.
Why do you want to know?
Because he was. I mean, Stan never had to pay for anything. You know.
No. I can imagine.
He never had to pay. Wherever he went, somebody would pay his hotel bill or wherever.
Was he a wealthy man?
Not really, because he not really. No.
Comfortable.
No, comfortable. He had a nice house, didn't he?
Yeah.
He bought Oliver Lodge's house, didn't he?
Yeah, the hill.
On the hill.
Yeah.
He had a nice house. He was comfortable. Didn't have to pay for anything. And I remember, good example. You'd have to look this up because I can't remember when it was. When Billy Wright died, I went to his funeral with Stan. Stan and I went on representing the club, and we parked a little bit down at that bottom end, you know, where the new down there, and we walked up
to the stadium.
To the stadium because they were meeting, and of course with Stan, he was a VIP guest, so he went into the boardroom at Wolverhampton with the family and close friends and relatives who had gathered in the boardroom. And anyway, when we walked up, there was huge applause because the crowds were, you know, lining the streets. So you walked up, and the crowds were lining. But there was, he was instantly recognised who he was, and that tells us again just what his position was. And there was huge applause. So. Tells it all, doesn't it, really, even then?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of myself growing up and not living in this
Yeah.
area. And the name, as you say, Sir Stanley Matthews.
Yes.
You know, with all due respect to Tom Finney in that loft house, Stanley Matthews, the name was up there as being famous.
Well, I was talking to Bobby Charlton we did the Loving Cup, didn't we? We did the Loving Cup.
New Year's Day.
And so I have to make a bit of a spiel. And one of the things I said, United went in the first division, so they didn't get a mug. I pointed that out to them, and that I did say to them they'd done pretty well since. But I said, and it was this mug was given for the coronation in 1937. I said, and Stoke City would have had a young Stanley Matthews playing then, and I went on to tell them how we got this wonderful, finest ever team of young local talent, and lost the best years through the war. But Bobby then started talking to me about Stanley, and he said that he used to go to Newcastle, and he and Bobby would go and stand by the corner flag, so they could get close to him when he was playing. So when he came to Newcastle, they'd go They wanted to be so they could be near him. That, but he said, you know, said there was never anybody like Stanley for me. And he mentioned even Tom. He said even Tom Finney. He said there was something about Matthews.
Yeah, an aura.
An aura, yes.
Yeah.
He said he didn't know what it was. He said, but there was nobody like Matthews. When he's the same age as me, and so he would be the same.
Yeah.
He got that aura, and yet he was the biggest name in football.
Yeah.
In his prime, you know, which is he lost some of his best years.
During the war.
Stanley lost some of his best years.